The Bench.
It's a winter's night in 1991. The air in Bennettsville, near the northern border of South Carolina, feels more like spring than the usual chill of February. The peaceful chirping of cicadas breaks the silence around Evans Correctional Institution. Fences with double razor wire separate it from the rest of the world. During the day, this prison is full of noise from over 1,000 inmates. But at night, it's quiet. The prisoners are locked in their cells, and now and then you hear the shuffle of a guard's feet on patrol. The men here are the state's worst. Murderers, rapists, and criminals too high risk to go anywhere else. On this night, one inmate has waited for the noise to die down, for the guard's footsteps to fade into the night. He's waiting for the right moment to press record.
I am John Todd, and this tape is being made in a prison cell in South Carolina. It is very late at night. All the inmates are locked down in their cells, but you will still hear noises off and on.
John is 6'4". His wiry frame is hunched over a contraband cassette recorder.
And if the guards come by, I have to stop and be very quiet.
John has a message for the world outside the prison walls.
The reason for this tape is that I have been framed and put in prison, and only recently did I find out how it was really accomplished.
He's serving a 30-year sentence for a crime he says he didn't commit. There were dozens of accusations brought against him to humiliate and delegitimize him, to silence him.
The word of what has happened to me has not gotten out of the state of South Carolina. I've been in a prison cell for 3 years, and that time is very closely guarded secret by the government.
John wanted anyone listening to his recording to know powerful people had got him. And for John's countless followers around the world who knew him, this message was a confirmation of their biggest fears. For 15 years, John had been raising the alarm about a covert network of influential figures, politicians, religious leaders, businessmen, artists, who were controlling things behind the scenes. Now, he says, they've put him away for good.
Whoever receives a copy of this tape, I'm asking you to make copies and get the word out.
The original recording was lost, but not before it was carefully transcribed. What you're hearing is likely one of John's followers reading that transcript. This transcript would eventually make its way around the world. But shortly after he recorded this final message, the name John Todd was never uttered in the prison again. It was the last time the man ever communicated with the outside world. Just as suddenly as he rose to prominence 14 years earlier, John Todd vanished. After years of exposing mysteries, he suddenly became one himself. So who cares, right? This guy isn't the first convict to believe he was wrongly imprisoned, or the first to think his fate was part of a grand conspiracy. But John Todd wasn't an ordinary guy. And the theories he helped promote, they weren't your run-of-the-mill conspiracy theories. In fact, the things John said on his many recordings changed our world, but for the worse. John's story too is one of a meteoric rise, followed by a spectacular fall from grace. But not before leaving an indelible mark on our world, one that would spread and grow in ways even he would have never thought possible. Because John Todd didn't just promote conspiracy theories in America, he's part of the reason they caught on in the first place. John Todd is the most influential ideologue you've never heard of. From Magnificent Noise and Sony Music Entertainment, this is Cover Up, The Conspiracy Tapes. I'm Paul Murphy. Episode 1, The Witch. Have you ever come across an object that you genuinely thought was cursed? Like the videotape in the movie The Ring, or the doll in Annabelle. Seemingly innocent items that when someone comes into contact with them, it changes them. Makes them do weird things. Sometimes it drives them crazy. That's how I feel about the John Todd tapes. They're 8 double-sided cassettes recorded in the late 70s.
One thing I'd like to say before I get started, it never seems to fail that when I'm done, few of my brothers and sisters in the Lord have fear in their hearts. Seems like every time we talk about the enemy, Christians become afraid rather than stirred up and fighting mad.
That's John Todd's actual voice recorded in 1977. He spoke mostly at churches to anxious Christian Americans who were concerned that their way of life was in danger. And John had a simple answer. He was warning people about a conspiracy involving witches led by a sinister organization.
Could you, in just a few words, summarize what you understand the Illuminati is?
Many people call it the Great Conspiracy, but actually the Illuminati is about 1,000 conspiracies all running at one time.
He said that there were dangerous forces within the government, within culture, conspiring to tear irreparable holes in the social fabric, to threaten good, moral society.
They don't produce rock music to make money. They don't need that money. They own everything anyway. They do it to put demonic influence in your life. Music is a spell, and every witch knows it.
And those forces are more than just power and influence. They were supernatural. Rock and roll isn't just music. It's a spell being cast on our teenagers.
Parents, don't pray that your kids throw out the rock music. It doesn't belong to them. It belongs to you.
And perhaps the most unbelievable part of all, these recordings would reach many thousands of people. People would make bootleg copies and distribute them all over the world. Years before the term viral was ever associated with an amateur recording, John Todd had his moment. And wherever they went, they would inspire fear and violence.
You can't defend yourself with a hunting rifle. It's impossible. Not against the way that it's going to be with the weapons they're going to be using against you. While you're standing there rebuking them, expecting them to fall over, I'll be using a shotgun.
The violent shootout at Ruby Ridge, the fiery death of Branch Davidians at Waco, the radical beliefs of the Children of God cult, they all have John's fingerprints on them. When Osama bin Laden was killed by US forces in Pakistan in 2011, the transcript of John's prison recording was found in a book among bin Laden's meager belongings. And it even continues today. When you read the allegations of the Pizzagate conspiracy, or the beliefs of the QAnon movement that sprung up from it, you hear allegations that there is a shadowy organization, the Illuminati, pulling the strings, who practice grisly and depraved rituals, use cryptic symbols hidden in plain sight, and ultimately want to destroy traditional American values. When you hear those, you're hearing John Todd's teachings. When you hear the allegations of the insurrectionists storming the US Capitol on January 6th,
Breach of the Capitol!
you're hearing ideas that spread on John's tapes. This is what convinced me that these tapes were cursed. They seem to have an almost magical effect on people. And I should know, because it's happened to me too. I've been obsessed with them for almost 10 years. I've listened to them countless times, each time scribbling more notes, researching where they were recorded, and speaking to people who were there. It's consumed me. I first came across these tapes at the same time I just moved to the United States from Australia. And the more I learned about John Todd and these tapes, the more troubled I became that this voice and these ideas had deeply influenced the place I now called home. But the more I listened, the more I wanted to know, why do these tapes and the man who made them have such a powerful effect on people? And to answer that question, we need to go back to the very beginning, to a time before any of these tapes were ever recorded. The first time John Todd ever told his story to an audience. From very humble beginnings, once John got a taste of notoriety, he'd developed a hunger for more and quickly learned how to get it. The Riverwalk in San Antonio is like a city below a city. It's a paved walkway below street level that follows the winding San Antonio River as it runs through downtown. It's lined with historic buildings, hotels and shops. With overhead bridges and boats passing by, it almost feels like you're in Venice. The date was Labor Day in 1972, and on this balmy Monday evening, John Todd was not casually strolling the walkway by the river, but anxiously, desperately searching for something. His next fix. For the past 2 days, he'd been without his regular drug supply.
Now, I was doing about $150 a day worth of crystal speed at the time. I weighed about 149 pounds. By Monday night, I almost didn't know who I was anymore. Bound and determined that I was going to get drugs no matter what. I got a handgun, started a car. The drive out was going to go to every area around that I knew if I had to kill the person, I was going to get drugs. And wrecked the car trying to get out of the parking lot. Just got out of the car, left the gun and everything just sitting there. Started walking down the street kind of in a daze.
His story was quite sensational, to say the least. I mean, stalking the streets of San Antonio, willing to murder someone just to get high? But John was troubled by more than just drug withdrawal. Over the past 48 hours, he'd started to seriously question everything he believed in. Inside, he was grappling with a profound spiritual crisis. By 2 a.m., John found himself standing outside a building on North St. Mary's Street in downtown San Antonio. It was an old brick structure with bars on the entrance. Until 2 years ago, it had been a burlesque club that advertised the largest striptease in Texas. But after the owners had had a spiritual reawakening, they closed the club and handed its operation over to a local church.
So I went over, opened the door, and it was supposed to close at midnight according to sign, but the door was unlocked. So I went on in, and one guy was there bent over the Coke fountain.
The man was Claude Elmer. He was in his late 30s and the manager of the Green Gate Club, which the local church had transformed into a Christian coffee shop. Claude was meant to close up by now, but he stayed late to fix the broken Coke machine.
He looked up and says, "Oh, can I help you?" And I said, "Yeah." He looked at me and says, "Yeah, I think you need some help."
John's appearance was quite striking. He was 23 years old, incredibly tall and thin, with shaggy brown hair and an overgrown mustache. But whenever people describe John to me, one feature stands out above them all, and it's nothing physical. It was his presence. John's presence had an intensity to it, an uncomfortable intensity, and his bright blue eyes seemed to pierce right through your soul. Feeling desperate and lost, John started opening up to Claude about his problem with drugs and said he'd been running with a bad group of people. After an hour of talking, he shared something that Claude wasn't prepared for. John was involved in witchcraft. He said he could cast spells and had participated in occult rituals with other witches, but he was beginning to suspect that this powerful magic he'd discovered was really the devil's work. Claude was shocked, but not scared. Instead, he reached for his Bible.
And he said, "I'd like to read you something." He opened his Bible to 2 Timothy 1:7.
The Bible verse is a letter written by Paul the Apostle while he was in prison. It reads, "For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind."
It is the best scripture in the world to witness to anybody in the occult. Because when you're in the occult, there's one thing that you do not have. You do not have a mind
without fear, 24 hours a day. You live in a nightmare world, and you try to convince yourself by brainwashing yourself that you're not unhappy. And he sat there and he said, God can remake your mind and take away the fear. When he said, take away the fear, I said, let's get with this thing right now. And he started praying with me, and he led me in a prayer of salvation. And I remember when I closed, I said, Lord, I want your forgiveness. I want you to take this fear out of my life.
According to John, the fear was not only what horrible things the coven leaders might force you to do, but the fear that you cannot leave. Leaving would mean the other witches coming after you, so you can't tell anyone what you know about their secrets.
And I was sitting there shaking, scared to death somebody's going to walk through the door anytime and see me in this place and report me. I said, Lord, take the fear away. And when I got up out of there, I didn't have any fear.
John had walked into that building as a drug-addled witch and walked out a fearless, Jesus-loving Christian. It was an amazing story. So good, in fact, Claude arranged for 2 leaders from the church to come to the Green Gate Club a couple nights later to hear it for themselves. Claude had assumed they'd continue the work he had started, helping John find salvation. But instead of offering spiritual guidance, the leaders had questions. They wanted to know more about witchcraft and the presence of occult groups in San Antonio. The church leaders were worried, and John Todd, he was all too happy to stoke their fears. Six weeks later, a young reporter from the San Antonio News named Jim Dolan was sent out by his editor to report on a strange tip.
One of our reporters came to work and said, my church is getting worked up about witchcraft. I think we have witches all over the place here. There's a lot of wild stuff going on, things are being said from the pulpit that I've never heard before.
Jim headed to First Baptist Church in the suburb of Castle Hills.
Castle Hills is a inner ring suburb. It was large lots with large homes, fairly affluent population. Not the kind of place where you'd normally hear this sort of thing being said from the pulpit or this thing being written about in the media.
After the First Baptist leaders heard John Todd's story, they arranged a safe location for him to go into hiding to prevent any retaliation from other witches for converting to Christianity and telling the ministers about the coven's plans. The only way to contact him was through the church. Jim's car approached the impressively large structure that made up Castle Hills First Baptist. Jim went in to talk to the assistant pastor about the claims of witchcraft in Castle Hills.
And he said, we have a wizard. We have a guy from the inside who's our helper here, who's helping us uproot these things, find them and uproot them. And he told me his name was John Todd.
The pastor organized for Jim to meet with the mysterious wizard.
Strange guy. He was kind of a slight figure with a very strong face, a mustache, prominent cheekbones, looked like a kind of a in-your-face sort of guy. But, well, I remember he said he'd been in the military and that he'd had a rough early life and that he found the way to get what he wanted was with magic. And I said, where did you learn it? But he said someone showed him how to do spells and he discovered that they worked and he was using them more and more. And he said he realized eventually that this was Satan at work, and he couldn't continue doing this. And he decided to rid himself of all this evil and to stop doing spells and then help other people avoid the path he had followed.
John told Jim that in occult circles, he went by the name Lance Collins. He discovered witchcraft and the power of spell casting while he was serving in the army 6 years ago. Since then, he'd risen the ranks to the level of Grand Druid, which meant he was the leader of 13 covens in the United States, including 3 in San Antonio. John told Jim stories about local covens who were sacrificing animals and even humans, despite lacking any physical evidence or missing persons. If Jim had any skepticism at this point, he held it back and just kept asking questions. When Jim asked John why he left witchcraft, John's answer was cryptic and vague. He simply said he'd been deceived. This church, like many at the time, was competing for congregants by booking engaging, sometimes sensational speakers, and John Todd certainly fit the bill. John, as it turned out, liked the spotlight and shared his miraculous story with fervour. As for Jim Dolan, well, all this business of witches and the occult sure made for a great headline. Jim's article was published on Friday, October 20th in 1972 with the headline Shadow World Battleground. In the article, John dropped a bombshell. A secret ceremony was planned for San Antonio soon. He said that other Grand Druids were travelling to San Antonio to perform a ceremony there that would usher in a one-world government and religion, united under witchcraft. And the night of this ritual? The last day of the month, Halloween night. October 31st, Jim returned to Castle Hills. In response to the planned satanic ceremony, First Baptist had planned an event of their own. They dubbed it Operation Jesus Trek. The plan was to gather young people together in the parking lot outside the church and join in prayer to prevent the witches' ceremony from being successful. And the highlight of the night? At the end, John had announced he would burn his occult items, including his Book of Shadows. That's a sacred diary used by witches to compile their spells, rituals, and other magical insights. When Jim got out of his car, a crowd of 200 mostly teenagers were loudly singing hymns as they stacked books and vinyl records into piles. In the centre of the parking lot were several aluminum trash cans, and from inside, flames leapt, and smoke billowed into the cool night sky. Then, from amidst the fervent crowd, John Todd stepped forward and made his way towards the centre.
He did have something about him when he's in front of a crowd, because he walked up to that trash can and put his arms out, and 200 people who'd been screaming and stomping fell silent in seconds because Johnny's about to speak. John gave a kind of a sermon and talked about how it's time to reclaim our world.
After John finished speaking, one of the church leaders held his arms high in the air, eyes shut, and proclaimed, "We pray you, Lord, to take these things of the devil from us and from our hearts." Then John directed the crowd to throw the books and records into the fiery trash cans.
They had a big pile of things to burn, and so I went over to that pile to see what they were going to burn. And I'm rooting around looking for something that would be occult. There was a copy of the Yellow Pages, the phone book. They had a stack of records, and they had a Beatles album, they had a Stones album. I picked up Chattanooga Choo Choo, and I was thinking, I think I want to take this home.
Chattanooga Choo Choo is a classic American big band song that was made famous by Glenn Miller in 1941. It doesn't really mention anything about witchcraft or the devil. It's mostly about a train journey from New York to Chattanooga, Tennessee.
But then somebody grabbed it and said, no, we're going to burn that one too. You know, this is a cult. Chattanooga Choo Choo is witchcraft. Come on. But yeah, I don't think they wanted anybody to look closely at what they were burning.
But the spectacle worked. It had attracted newspaper and local TV reporters, and it drew in a crowd. Not a huge crowd. But this was just the beginning for John, and he was learning a valuable lesson. Sensationalism and spectacle captured attention. John's life had taken a swift trajectory in such a small amount of time. He'd gone from wandering the Riverwalk looking for drugs to whipping a modest upper-class church into a frenzy over witchcraft and organising a modern-day book burning. John Todd used to be nothing but a 20-something ex-drug addict. Now, he was a former Grand Druid, someone church leaders turned to for counsel. Within the week, John left San Antonio in search of bigger audiences. But what he would find was something much more valuable: an advocate. John found audiences in other churches, but he also started to appear on Christian television programs, including one called Amazing Prophecies, led by a dashing televangelist with a rapid-fire and theatrical way of stirring fear and anxiety in his audience, making all kinds of end-time predictions in his presentations. Before he came out on camera, John was instructed to focus on the more macabre and grisly specifics of his story. It was a big event, much bigger than a parking lot in Castle Hills, and John made sure he delivered the goods by adding some new details to his original story. Those human sacrifices he'd heard of, now he'd actually participated in them. John said he'd personally seen South Dakota Senator George McGovern plunge a knife into the chest of a young girl, and he'd been advisor on occult practices to the Kennedy family. To me, the most amazing thing about these appearances is that John received little to no pushback on these claims. Here was John making accusations of murder against a presidential candidate and a claim that a president of the United States practiced witchcraft. The crowd just sat there listening, not questioning a thing. John had the appearance of an enthralling guest speaker, albeit the circus freak in a spectacular carnival. But the truth is, he was struggling. As he was discovering, the ex-Satanist speaking circuit was a crowded marketplace, with not one but two other former devil worshippers who were speaking across America at that time, and they were bankrolled by the same large church ministry. John was still very much an independent contractor and striving to compete with the bigger audiences the others attracted. But as John was about to find out, there was someone in the audience at Amazing Prophecies that afternoon who would change all that.
Greetings in the precious name of our Lord Jesus Christ. This is Jack Chick speaking.
In the 1970s, Jack Chick was building his reputation as the publisher of illustrated gospel booklets, known as tracts. These pocket-sized Christian comics, also called Chick tracts, were about 20 pages long. They started as mostly black and white, printed on flimsy paper like a kind of far-right Christian zine. Though Chick himself was a recluse, his comics were everywhere, designed to be left in public spaces like subways or phone booths, even slipped into kids' trick-or-treating bags on Halloween, poised to be found by unsuspecting converts-to-be. But these seemingly innocuous titles with pulpy cover illustrations would open into shocking, hateful, gory imagery, threatening damnation and hellfire for any Muslim, Catholic, homosexual, Jew, biker, rock and roller, Dungeons and Dragons enthusiast, witch. The list goes on. Chick's message was simple: embrace fundamentalist Christianity in all its principles, or burn in hell. As Jack listened to John speak, something clicked. Impressed by John's tales of witchcraft and satanic sacrifices, he introduced himself to John after the event.
Jack Chick felt like a lot of things that he was watching going on in society were now made very clear to him what was going on behind them.
This is Kurt Kersteiner, a self-described Jack Chick enthusiast and collector who lives in Florida.
John Todd explained to him that this wasn't all just chance. It wasn't just evolving by accident. This was all an orchestrated plot to convert people from a Christian lifestyle or an honorable lifestyle into a corrupt one that would serve the purposes of Satan. And when he heard that there was actually an organization that was pulling the strings and that John Todd knew who these people were and had met them, this is just like a gold mine of material that he wanted to expose to the world.
Jack invited John to his offices in Rancho Cucamonga in San Bernardino County, California. For the next 2 months, Jack studiously wrote down John's accounts of witchcraft as he'd experienced it. It was a collaboration that would change the path of both of their careers. In January 1974, Chick Publications released a 32-page full-color comic book titled The Broken Cross. Its cover grabs your attention right away, A policeman escorts a startled hippie away from a mysterious clearing in the woods. He warns him, "Don't tell anyone what you've seen." Inside, the pages are filled with lurid illustrations of a young, scantily clad woman being kidnapped, robed figures brandishing a bloody dagger, a homeless man eating a rotting finger, and the two muscle-bound heroes of the comic, the Crusaders, who are sometimes inexplicably shirtless. For a comic book that would be sold inside churches and religious bookstores, it was a visceral mix of horror, mystery, and sex appeal.
It's probably one of my favorites. It reads like an episode of X-Files. A small southern town has some strange going-ons. People are murdered. Looks like there's even a case of cannibalism. What's going on? Well, the Crusaders go there to investigate, and they discover that this whole town is being run by an invisible army of witches and warlocks, and that who should be involved but, of course, law enforcement and the church. They're also part of the plot.
John Todd actually gets a mention at the start of The Broken Cross, is that right?
To the top of the first page. My deepest appreciation to John Todd, ex-Grand Druid priest, for the authenticity of the occult information used in this story. Also to the others who've come out of witchcraft and have verified this material. So you read that is literally the first lines of the story. And it puts a whole different spin on this thing because, most comic books are Superman and Spider-Man and stuff. You assume they're all fantasy. This is based on fact. At least that's how it purports to be. And, when the hitchhiker ends up getting injected and put to sleep and then sacrificed to a group of 13 occult witches by page 5, and they drink her blood, that's what you'd call a dramatic opening sequence.
John's collaboration with Jack Chick gave his story a stamp of approval that he couldn't find anywhere else. And the reach of Jack's comic books allowed John's story and name to spread far and wide.
Chick's comic books gave him a lot of credibility. He's kind of Superman. He's literally got his own little Superman comic.
With his own comic book and Jack Chick's approval, John Todd had everything he needed to go big. But there was one problem, and Jim Dolan, the reporter who covered John's book burning in San Antonio, saw an early sign of it that evening. Remember that Book of Shadows that John was going to burn in front of the crowd? Just before the burning started, Jim noticed that it was missing and asked John about it.
"Where's your Book of Shadows?" He said, "Oh, I don't think I can burn that. I think I need that."
John never burnt his Book of Shadows that night. Although he was traveling around telling people he was a former witch, saved by God and would never go back, the truth was much more complicated. Because John Todd hadn't given up on witchcraft at all. Next time on Cover Up, the conspiracy tapes. John Todd seems to flip between witchcraft and Christianity.
They found out that this was all going on after he had claimed to have been saved out of witchcraft.
He then became one of the hottest Christian speakers in the US.
There was a need that the mainstream had for explanations that were neat, that would leave us as comfortable as possible and leave us being the good guys. And nothing does that better than a good occult story.
His tapes will transform peaceful men into terrorists.
You don't believe in God, you don't believe in the Bible, try it and find out. Right, you fire on us, and it starts.
The John Todd tapes would radicalize a new generation of people when they appear online.
All the stuff that he was talking about in the 70s has come true. And the things that he said that they were working on are coming true today.
Somebody that's exposing the Illuminati at that level, of course they're going to be number one on the Illuminati's hit list.
It looks very possible that he was genuine, that he was framed, and that he was disappeared.
While I go searching for anyone who can tell me what happened to John after he disappeared.
I heard he was thrown out of a helicopter. And, that sounded just, what a great ending to that story.
He had made a living denouncing witchcraft. and Satanism and saying all these awful things and encouraging Christians to freaking arm themselves and to kill and burn witches. And it's just, and all of it was just a fantasy.
Cover Up the Conspiracy Tapes is produced by Jesse Baker and Eric Newsom of Magnificent Noise for Sony Music Entertainment. Our production staff includes Josie Holtzman and Isaac Kestenbaum, with help from Julia Nat and Tuck Woodson. Sound design by Sam Baer. The series was fact-checked by Kelsey Kudak. For Sony Music Entertainment, executive producers Catherine St. Louis and Jonathan Hirsch. Our show's executive producer is Eric Newsom. I'm your host, Paul Murphy. If you're enjoying the show, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. It helps other listeners find the show. Thanks for listening.